2022's Bubble is kind of like someone got drunk at an anime studio and said, hey, what if the Little Mermaid took place in post-apocalyptic Tokyo, but the mermaid parkoured across the sky with homeless teenagers, and a producer overheard and was just like, take all my money. Bubble learns nothing from the Little Mermaid. Also, I'm talking about Bubble here, not The Bubble, which came out around the same time and is also on Netflix. Bubble has floating buildings and an anime girl in a tailor outfit. The Bubble has dinosaurs doing TikTok dances. I've never made a YouTube video before, but when I saw this film, I knew I had to make this video and throw my opinions out into the world to land where they may. If you're like me, you saw this thumbnail on Netflix and thought, wow, that's going to be one of those pretty award-winning anime films, like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time or Your Name. And let's be upfront here, it is an extremely pretty film. And the soundtrack absolutely slaps. But the story? Oh dear, oh dear. Disclaimer. If you really liked Bubble, this is not meant as a personal attack against you, nor do I mean to demean the hard work of the animators or staff. These are merely my observations on story structure, characterization, and setting. Let's look at what went wrong, why Hans Christian Andersen would cry if he saw this film, and how this actually could have been a decent movie. Spoilers ahead, you have been warned. If you enjoy this video, or even if you love to hate my opinions, comment, click that like button, and subscribe for more content. Part 1. The Little Mermaid. Let's begin with the plot of Bubble, just as a reminder of what we're dealing with here. I'm not going to cheat and look it up. This is going to be entirely from memory, so let's see what I remembered. On the most basic level, a story should give you some idea of what happened. So let's see what I got out of Bubble's story. I'm going to tell it chronologically, but bear in mind there are several flashbacks. Bubbles of water fell from the sky onto Tokyo. It was pretty and charming at first, but then things blew up. Everyone except young orphans evacuated, and also things kind of float now, except not people. The bubbles stick around, floating in the air, and stray kids use them to parkour across the sky. They compete with each other in team capture the flag contests. Hibiki is a teenage boy and our main character. He's brooding, always has headphones on, and he's searching for the song made by the bubbles that only he can hear. He's the best at parkour, of course. One day, he nearly drowns and is rescued by what he assumes is a mermaid. But no, it's a girl called Uta. She's actually a bubble who turned into a girl, and if she touches Hibiki, she starts to turn back into bubbles. She solves this problem sensibly by covering herself head to toe. No, not at all. Actually, she wears a mini skirt, a crop top, and a single glove. She literally has to learn to speak. He falls in love with her because she can sing the same song the bubbles apparently sing. They parkour together, facing off against evil streamers. Then the bubbles that have been peacefully floating around Tokyo for the last decade get angry. I can't remember why. I think it might be because Uta won't come back, or because she touched Hibiki, who somehow didn't notice her entire arm dissolving. Anyway, the bubbles grab Hibiki and try to murder him, and Uta saves him by touching him and turning into bubbles. Somehow this appeases the bubbles and everything calms down. At the end, it's revealed that Hibiki just sticks around Tokyo and keeps doing these parkour races, only this time joined by a bubble who, I guess, is Uta. Right, let's see how much I got correct. Just look this up on Wikipedia. His final exhale combines with some of the bubbles to make a 15-year-old girl. She knows the song he hears in his head. Those are some weird implications. Are Uta and Hibiki the same person? Is Uta Hibiki's child? Did Eve come forth from the rib of Adam? What's going on? Also, on the theme of corrections, Hibiki actually does notice that Uta's arm dissolves away into bubbles. What he and no one else notices is that actually, much earlier in the film, she touches him and her hand and her fingers sort of turn a bit into bubbles, and she just covers that right up with a glove. That's it. That's the plot. No idea what the bubbles were or what they wanted. Very little interaction between Uta and Hibiki before they supposedly fall in love. All the while, Uta keeps telling us a severely redacted version of The Little Mermaid. Note that they only mention parts which are also in the Disney version, maybe in case viewers aren't familiar with the original story. What is the story that so captivates her all this time? Let's actually look at what happens in The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. The Little Mermaid follows a mermaid with a fascination for the human world. Mermaids in this world don't have souls, we're told, so when they die they turn into sea foam. A soul can be obtained through marriage with a human. The Little Mermaid saves a prince from drowning, but he wakes up at the wrong time and assumes that his rescuer is this other girl from a temple. In exchange for her beautiful voice, a sea witch gives the Little Mermaid legs. Although there are drawbacks. Every step is like walking on knives. She's of course mute, and if she can't convince this prince to marry her and he marries someone else, she'll turn permanently into sea foam. She dances for the prince despite her pain, and he seems to like her, but then decides that he'll only marry the one who rescued him from drowning. The girl who he thinks rescued him turns out to be an actual princess, so they go off to get hitched. The Little Mermaid's sisters are very concerned, and they give all their beautiful hair to the sea witch in return for a magic dagger. If the Little Mermaid stabs the prince to death, she'll turn back into a mermaid and can live the rest of her life with them. She doesn't do that. She just jumps into the sea to turn into sea foam, but out of nowhere, suddenly she becomes a so-called daughter of the air. These daughters of the air do good deeds with the power of the winds, and apparently if the Little Mermaid does 300 years of community service as a daughter of air, she can get a soul and go to heaven. The end. The Little Mermaid perhaps has its own narrative problems, and we're not going to go too much into that, or why Hans Christian Andersen wrote this story the way it is, or what it might have been based on, but I'm sure you can see how Bubble has strong similarities to the story. But the creators of Bubble didn't want to make something completely derivative. Oh no, they were making an original, pretty anime film. Honestly, they could have learnt a few lessons from the original Little Mermaid tale. In Bubble, we don't bother with things like story structure, building tension, establishing events that then cause other events to happen. Why do that when you could just have things happen, one after another? For example, the scientist is kidnapped randomly. Better have a parkour battle. What do any of the characters want? Is Uta actually trying to romance Hibiki? Under what conditions does the bubble apocalypse stop? At least in The Little Mermaid, we know that the mermaid's goal is to get the prince to marry her, or face an actual consequence of turning into sea foam. Who, if anyone, is an antagonist in Bubble? What are the stakes? Where is the conflict? Sure, you could say it's the rival parkour gang, the Morticians, who are really poorly conceived streamers. Like, why would streamers want to look like techie, faceless minions? Actual streamers go to great lengths to seem like relatable, friendly underdogs. You could say that The Little Mermaid doesn't really have a villain, but at least it has a love rival, and at least the Sea Witch only offered Catch-22 magic. And we know what happens to the Little Mermaid if she fails to get her man. Bubble can't even commit to Uta dissolving away, as she seems to parkour with Hibiki at the end of the film in the form of a bubble. And what about perspective? In Bubble, it's like Hibiki is the main character, and what a joyless, brooding protagonist he is too. They give him little personality and a lot of talent for everything he tries. But he seems to disappear randomly in the narrative.
The Little Mermaid commits to the Little Mermaid's perspective. We know what she knows. We root for her because we know she's in pain. She actively makes decisions and doesn't just react. And then there's the love story aspect.
The Little Mermaid is a short story. It's really not drawn out, so when the mermaid falls instantly in love, we believe it. Bubble meanders for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and still somehow by the end I'm not convinced at all there is any chemistry between Uta and Hibiki.
Bubble cheats. Instead of a solid story structure, character motivations, rising tensions, it just tries to get viewers to remember how they feel about the Little Mermaid fairy tale and transfer those feelings to Bubble.
To summarise where Bubble fails to learn the lessons from the Little Mermaid, firstly, what are the goals? What are the stakes? If Uta can't get Hibiki to love her, could she turn into sea foam like the Little Mermaid? Where is the conflict? Could there be a morally grey helper like the Sea Witch, or a love rival for Uta? What does it add to the story to have Hibiki, the prince, instead of Uta, the Little Mermaid, be the emotional core of the story? And finally, Bubble took a very short story indeed and tried to turn it into a long movie, stretching out a very simple message and adding random elements.
Part 2. Bad writing.
In this part, I'm going to talk about 3 things: characters, disability, and world building. Let's talk about characters first of all. This is a film that doesn't really believe in show don't tell. The characters aggressively tell you everything that they think and feel. So why is it that we never really know what they want? Shin is this kindly, slightly older guy whose entire role is to look out for the kids doing dangerous stunts. But honestly, I spent the first half suspecting that he was going to turn out to be a traitorous bad guy because he was given no apparent motivations. And then I realised that none of the characters have any kind of motivations. The film doesn't really explain why anyone is where they are, or what they hope to gain from that, or why they do what they do.
There's a scientist girl who keeps making decisions based on feelings, or telling people to do things based on feelings, like a scientist does. Her role in the story seems to mostly be about telling Uta the Little Mermaid story. She's supposedly hanging around the main characters because she's doing so-called research. But what kind of research involves living with a parkour team of orphaned children? Then we have our sort of villains, the Morticians, this rival parkour team. They kidnap this scientist girl at one point to absolutely no effect on the plot. Why do they exist? Why are there so many children and no adults in the Tokyo apocalypse? Then we have our main character, Hibiki. Now, I don't want to use words like Gary Sue or the Chosen One, because I honestly think that they're often used incorrectly. But oh my gosh, he is some stereotypes and a half. They decide halfway through that Hibiki needs a personality, so they have him garden on a rooftop. This is never foreshadowed. Does he have time to garden with all his parkouring? Why does the guy obsessed with one song like gardening? Well, we know it's because they wanted a pretty backdrop for Uta's singing, but make it make sense in the story. Why is Hibiki, who is supposedly surrounded by others with hypersensitive hearing at the time of the bubbles falling, the only one who can hear the bubble song?
On that note, let's talk about disability in Bubble and how this film wants to have its cake and eat it. Merriam-Webster defines the word disability as a physical, mental, cognitive, or developmental condition that impairs, interferes with, or limits a person's ability to engage in certain tasks or actions or participate in typical daily activities and interactions. So, although Bubble doesn't use the word disabled or disability, I'm going to make the argument that several characters are in fact disabled. I think too often we see disability in the media as represented only by wheelchairs and prosthetic limbs, when actually a really bad allergy, an impaired sense of hearing, or a lifelong illness is also a disability. Conditions like this are often called invisible because they're not always immediately apparent. There isn't a medical condition that turns people into bubbles when exposed to a trigger, and thank goodness for that. But if there was, and Uta had it, she would definitely be classed as disabled. We're not really sure why Hibiki can hear the bubbles sing, but we do know that he has hearing so oversensitive that it was disabling for him as a kid. As a teenager, he can still hear the song of the bubbles, but this oversensitive hearing never really affects him again. Sure, occasionally he wears headphones, but he doesn't overhear things that he shouldn't, like that one character in Encanto, and he doesn't experience sensory overload like young Clark Kent in Man of Steel. The fact that he has ultra-sensitive hearing just seems to be thrown in there to offer a maybe explanation for why he hears bubbles and no one else does. Uta becomes disabled. After an initial underwater kiss that seems to go okay, she starts to turn into bubbles if she touches Hibiki, starting with a few bubbles at her fingers, then her arm falls away into bubbles, and finally she bubblifies completely. Uta not being able to touch the person she loves is all very pushing daisies, but unlike that short-lived TV series, we don't see her trying to mitigate her condition. She doesn't cover her skin more, she doesn't stop parkouring near Hibiki, and she certainly doesn't tell him what's happening so that he can give her reasonable accommodations. Although it's all very new to her, she doesn't seem to experience existential dread or mental distress regarding the solubility of her body. But Uta's not really human. How attached is she to limbs she's only had for a day or two? Let's contrast that with a fully human character who has lost a limb. Shin, who claims that he doesn't parkour anymore because of his prosthetic leg, something that is introduced very significantly with heavy exposition. He hasn't parkoured in years because of it, he says, but at climax, during crunch time, he seemingly has no problem parkouring again, and he's even better at it than the young lads who've been running around in weird anti-gravity this whole time. What this film does with disability is miss opportunities to introduce conflict, tension, and stakes. Shin's missing leg almost causes a problem. He briefly hits his prosthetic during a dangerous moment. But not only is this over really quickly, the metal leg might actually have saved him from the impact. Uta's inability to touch Hibiki and her bubblified fingers don't impede her at all, even when she turns completely into a bubble and, I guess, just keeps parkouring. After a while, Hibiki's hearing is never brought up. Disabilities don't affect their lives in any way. It doesn't make them more three-dimensional characters with internal and external struggles. It doesn't add narrative tension, putting physical obstacles between them and their goals. And it doesn't give the characters a struggle to overcome for their own personal growth. I don't even think it adds representation for disabled people very much. Supernaturally hearing the song of bubbles and arms dissolving into bubbles just aren't problems that people have. So, Bubble wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants characters with disabilities, but not characters in any way affected by disability. And the world building isn't even better.
For a start, what are the rules of the parkour game? It's so integral to everyone being where they are. Why is parkour their way of life? Is there a parkour league that they're trying to top? At least everyone has a rough idea how to play Quidditch after watching Harry Potter. Then I would question how the heck Hibiki and Uta's love story ties into the wider plot. The bubbles come down on Tokyo, he angers them, they destroy a bunch of buildings and then hang out in Tokyo, and then Uta stops them by touching Hibiki and becoming a bubble? Maybe? Is that the plot? Why are the bubbles even there? And why are they angry? How does a bubble get angry? And that leads me to the question of why does Uta take years after meeting Hibiki to turn into a girl? Well, we know it's so that a parkour society has time to spring up and so that Hibiki will be the right age to be a part of it. So why does Uta, the bubble, fall in love with a small child whose brain hasn't even finished developing? And finally, and most importantly, if a picture of a buff man had been on the side of the bus when Uta was rescuing Hibiki early on, would Uta have looked like that? Part 3. How this could have been a good film.
Let's not write off anime films, just look at similar films that did things much better.
2009's Summer Wars was a great one. Its cyber world is so real and immersive. You can imagine a whole virtual economy forming in a weird proto-metaverse. Bubble could have done something similar with its world building, instead of a very glossed over Neverland of parkouring teenagers and missing adults. The characters in Summer Wars are colourful and diverse, and it has a cross-generational message about family. What was Bubble's message, its central theme? I get that Bubble was a love story, maybe, but it feels very much like Hibiki and Uta are Barbie and Ken, and all the other characters are unnamed off-brand dolls. What about 2016's Your Name? What a film. Thinking about it still makes me tear up a little bit. That ending hits hard. The main characters, despite almost never being in the same place, had a more convincing love story and connection. It foreshadowed its apocalyptic moments. You can see Bubble trying to have moments of foreshadowing, like when a minor character almost falls into an antlion pit at the beginning. But it also has a lot that comes out of nowhere, like shadow version Uta beckoning her to the void. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time was also a better movie. Sure, I found the ending a bit dissatisfying, but that film did a much better job of setting up an intriguing mystery that you want answered. Why are the time jumps happening? Which Bubble could have done if it seriously asked the question, where did the bubbles come from? Let's also not write off Wit Studio, the studio behind Bubble. What else did they make? Attack on Titan, based on a manga. Vinland Saga, based on a manga. Ranking of Kings, based on a manga. Bubble was an original concept film, so maybe the problem came when they had to write something from scratch. But seriously, hear me out. I wish I could forget Vinland Saga, Attack on Titan, and Ranking of Kings, just so that I could watch it again for the first time. They're just so good, you guys.
So how would I improve Bubble? Well, first up, get a story structure. This film has too much plot to be a slice of life, but not enough to be an effective story. Sure, there's a little bit of story structure. Boy meets Bubble, they bond, and then a great sacrifice is made. But I'm talking invest in a proper 5-act dramatic structure. Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Freytag's pyramid, you know. Establish the world and the characters. If you want to keep the reason for the bubble phenomenon vague, fine, but give viewers a world where the rules are consistent and make sense. In terms of character, Kurt Vonnegut once said, "Every character should want something, even if it is only a glass of water." Establish some stakes, goals, and motivations. Why do we care about Uta and Hibiki's love story? Why do we care about the fate of Tokyo? Establish the conflict that prevents the characters from reaching their goals, if we knew what their goals were. Establishing stakes helps sort out the tension. At the climax, we should not be wondering why Uta is cuddling this shadowy version of herself. And on that theme, add a proper climax that the viewer can understand. Then serve as the resolution, the world after the story unfolds. I had no idea at the end why Uta seemed to be able to stick around as a bubble. The whole story seemed to completely lack consequences. And my major final suggestion? If the story is going to have a parkour sports game at its core, maybe tell us how you play. I mean, maybe the goal is to capture the flag. Fine, but half the time you have no idea who's in the lead, who's playing, or what they win. The antlion/vortex pits don't even seem like that much of a threat. Let's wrap this up. I didn't get to cover everything, but this video is already long enough. I want to take a moment to point out that you're not wrong if you liked the film. In fact, that's great. You should enjoy the things that you do. It's a visually stunning film, has an amazing soundtrack, and the concept of sky parkour with bubbles is genuinely amazing. At the time of filming this, it has a 6.3 on IMDb and a 7.33 on my anime list, so it was generally well received. However, I know that I'm not alone in criticizing this film. Here are some excerpts from a couple of funny reviews. What if we cross The Little Mermaid with parkour and make it an anime? $signs. This review charmingly compares the film to a toilet scrubber made of gold. I might not go that far. This person thought the film was pretty good, but they also didn't even understand what was happening. So ups and downs, I guess. In the end, all I can say is that I'm glad that this film was made, that these stunning visuals are out there for people to enjoy. But also, maybe next time which studio should put a little bit more effort into the writing before pouring all their money into a project. However, I should say that they are incredibly talented overall and have a proven track record of excellent anime. If you're on the fence about trying some of their other work, definitely try them out. On the Viking mood scale, this film gets, drumroll please, an angry Viking. Thanks for watching my video, guys. If you enjoyed my take on this topic, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll try to have new content out soon. If I got anything wrong about Bubble or The Little Mermaid, or if you just want to get into a little debate with me in the comments, leave a comment and let me know.